There is a question most people carry in silence for years and never say out loud. What if the reason your last relationship fell apart had nothing to do with the wrong person and everything to do with the wrong foundation? Because here is the truth that nobody preaches about on the highlight reel. You can have chemistry without a covenant. You can have attractions without architecture. You can have feelings that move like a flood, powerful, overwhelming, consuming, and still end up with nothing standing when the water recedes. Because feelings are not a foundation. And the enemy knows this. He has spent generations convincing an entire generation of believers that love is primarily something you feel, rather than something you build. That is the deception. And it has left a trail of broken relationships, confused hearts, and people who genuinely loved each other but had no structure beneath the love to hold the weight of a real life together. Today, I want to talk to you about something I'm calling the interior architecture of a lasting covenant. Not the exterior, not the appearance of love, not the Instagram version of a godly relationship. The inside, the bones, the load-bearing walls, the foundation that determines whether what you build together will stand for decades or collapse under the first real storm it faces. Because God is not just calling you to a relationship. He is calling you to a structure. And what you build on the inside of a covenant determines everything about how long it lasts on the outside. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus told a story that was never really about houses. He said one man built his house on sand and another built his on rock. And the storm came for both of them. The rain fell on both, the floods rose against both, the wind beat against both houses with equal force. The difference was never the storm. The difference was always the foundation. And what Jesus was describing underneath the metaphor is the interior reality of anything we build in our lives. Relationships included. So the question is not, will storms come to my marriage or my covenant relationship? They will. Storms are not a sign that you married the wrong person. Storms are the proof that you are in a real life with a real human being. The question is, what is underneath your love when the storm arrives? That is interior architecture. And today, I want to walk you through what God says must be built on the inside of a covenant for it to be lasting, fruitful, and unshakable. The first load-bearing wall, the architecture of identity before union. Before you build anything with another person, you must know who you are alone. This sounds simple, it is not simple. Because most people enter relationships hoping that the relationship will answer the question of who they are. They look to a partner for their sense of worth, their sense of purpose, their sense of belonging. And what happens is, they don't bring a person into the relationship. They bring a need. And needs, when unmet, become demands, and demands, when ignored, become resentment, and resentment over time becomes the quiet destruction of everything that was once beautiful. Psalm chapter 139 verse 14 says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made, your works are wonderful, I know that full well. Notice the phrase, I know that fully well. Not I hope that, not I'll believe that once someone loves me, not I'll feel that once I'm chosen. I know that fully well. The interior architecture of a lasting covenant begins with two people who already know who they are before they find each other. Because a covenant is not a merger of two incomplete people. A covenant is a union of two whole people choosing to serve something greater than either of them alone. When you don't know who you are, you will make the relationship responsible for your healing. You will outsource your wholeness to another human being, and no human being was built to carry that weight. The foundation cracks under the pressure of what it was never designed to hold. Knowing who you are in God, your identity, your calling, your worth, is not preparation for a relationship. It is the first wall of the relationship itself. The second load-bearing wall, the architecture of covenant consciousness. There is a word that appears all through Scripture that has been almost entirely removed from our modern vocabulary of love. The word is covenant. Not a contract, not agreement, not arrangement. Covenant. And the difference between those words is not semantic, it is structural. It changes everything about how you approach love and commitment. A contract says, I will perform as long as you perform. A covenant says, I am bound to this not by your behavior but by my word before God. In Genesis chapter 2 verse 24, after God creates Eve and brings her to Adam, the text records this. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The phrase hold fast in Hebrew is dabak. It means to cling, to cleave, to pursue something with total commitment. This is not the language of convenience. This is the language of covenant. The interior architecture of a lasting relationship is built by two people who understand that what they are entering is not a feeling-dependent arrangement. It is a sacred binding word spoken before heaven. Most relationships today are built on contract logic. When the feelings change, the commitment weakens. When circumstances become difficult, the exit strategy becomes more appealing than the investment in repair. But covenant consciousness does not ask, are my needs being met, as its first question. It asks, am I being faithful to my word? It asks, what does this other person need from me today? It asks, what did I commit to, and am I living from that commitment? This is not weakness. This is not doormat theology. This is the strongest form of love that exists, a love that does not bend under pressure because it is rooted in decision rather than emotion. Emotion is beautiful, emotion is real, but emotion is weather. Covenant is the ground beneath the weather. And you need both, but you must know which one holds the weight. The third load-bearing wall, the architecture of communication as covenant language. Most relationships don't die from betrayal. They die from silence. They die from the conversations that were never had, the wounds that were never named, the needs that were buried under the assumption that love should be able to read minds. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Not some power, not partial power. The power of the tongue. Inside a covenant, communication is not simply a tool for exchanging information. It is the language of the architecture itself. Every conversation either builds a room or removes a brick. Every unresolved conflict leaves a hairline fracture in the wall, and hairline fractures, if left unaddressed, become structural failures. Ephesians chapter 4 verse 15 instructs us to be speaking the truth in love. Both sides of that phrase matter equally. Truth without love is brutality. It tears down walls without offering to help rebuild them. Love without truth is cowardice. It protects the comfort of the moment at the expense of the health of the structure. Speaking the truth in love is the interior language of a lasting covenant. It means learning to say, when you did this, I felt this, instead of you always do this. It means learning to ask for what you need instead of punishing someone for not knowing. It means learning to repair quickly, to not let the sun go down on unresolved conflict, as Ephesians chapter 4 verse 26 instructs. Because every night you go to sleep with something unaddressed between you, the architecture shifts slightly. And over months, over the years, over a decade of small unaddressed fractures, the structure becomes unsafe. Communication inside a covenant is not optional. It is not a personality trait some people have and others don't. It is a discipline, a skill that must be developed with the same intentionality as any other form of spiritual growth. You must learn to speak, you must learn to listen, you must learn to repair. That is the third wall. The fourth load-bearing wall, the architecture of forgiveness as structural repair. Here is something that will challenge the way you think about relationships. Unforgiveness is not a moral failing, it is a structural crisis. Because inside a covenant, every wound that is not forgiven becomes a weight that the architecture must carry indefinitely. And covenants were not built to carry the weight of unforgiveness indefinitely. They will bow under it. Colossians chapter 3 verse 13 says, bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. The standard is not your pain tolerance. The standard is, as the Lord forgave you. That is a staggering standard. It is not a feeling. It is a decision. It is a repeated decision. It is a decision you sometimes have to make 17 times about the same wound before it loses its power over you. Forgiveness is not saying what was done to you was acceptable. Forgiveness is refusing to let what was done to you determine the structural integrity of something God is building through you. Matthew chapter 18 verse 22, when Peter asks how many times he must forgive, Jesus answers 70 times 7. Not because he is giving Peter a quota, but because he is describing the nature of forgiveness inside a real, enduring covenant. It is not a one-time act. It is a practice, it is a commitment, it is a structural habit of repair. The interior architecture of a lasting covenant includes two people who know how to ask for forgiveness and how to give it, not perfectly, but repeatedly, faithfully, and with the understanding that every act of true forgiveness is a reinforcement of the foundation beneath them both. The fifth load-bearing wall, the architecture of shared purpose. Here is the question that most couples never think to ask before they commit. Where are we going together? Not where are you from, not what do you enjoy, not what is your love language. Where are we going? Because two people can be deeply compatible in personality and entirely misaligned in direction, and that misalignment will pull the structure apart at the seams over time. Amos chapter 3 verse 3 asks, "Can two walk together unless they are agreed?" The word agreed here is not about having the same preferences in music or food. It is about direction, destination, the shared sense of where God is leading and what He is requiring. When two people enter a covenant with no shared vision, no unified sense of what their life together is for, they begin to build in separate directions. And separate directions create a structure with no center. Inside a lasting covenant, there must be a shared spiritual vision, a shared sense of calling, a shared commitment to something beyond the relationship itself, a purpose that is bigger than both individuals and gives the covenant a reason to push through difficulty rather than walking away from it. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 2 says, "Write the vision, make it plain on tablets so he may run who reads it." What is the vision of your household? What does God intend to accomplish through the union of your lives? What is the thing you are building together that the world will be different because it was built? When a covenant has a shared vision, the difficulty of the journey becomes worth it. Because you are not just fighting to stay together. You are fighting for something together. That distinction is everything. The sixth load-bearing wall, the architecture of spiritual alignment. This is the capstone, the ceiling above every other wall. And without it, everything else remains structurally vulnerable. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 14 uses language that is often quoted in the context of romantic relationships. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. But this verse is not just about avoiding relationships with people outside the faith. It is a statement about the mechanics of shared labor. A yoke is a device placed across the necks of two animals pulling the same load. If one animal is larger, stronger, or moving in a different direction, the entire yoke becomes painful, inefficient, and destructive for both. Spiritual alignment inside a covenant is not simply about whether two people attend the same church. It is about whether they are pulling in the same spiritual direction, whether they share the same relationship with God as the center of their lives, whether prayer is a language they both speak rather than one person dragging the other toward. 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 7 speaks of treating a spouse as a fellow heir of the grace of life, a co-inheritor, an equal participant in what God is doing. That is the image of spiritual alignment. Two people who are not in competition spiritually, two people who are not at different speeds in their walk with God, two people who sharpen each other, pray with each other, push each other toward holiness rather than toward comfort alone. Proverbs chapter 27 verse 17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." The sharpening process is not always comfortable, but it produces an edge, it produces clarity, it produces two people who are more useful to the kingdom together than either was apart. That is what spiritual alignment builds inside a covenant. And it is the difference between a relationship that is spiritually alive and one that is merely religiously functional. Here is where this all comes together. Because perhaps you are sitting with this right now and realizing that what you have been searching for in relationships has been the feeling of love, without ever considering the architecture of love. Perhaps you have been asking, is this the right person? before you have ever asked, "Am I the right person right now?" Perhaps you have been praying for God to send your covenant partner while God has been waiting for you to build the interior walls that will make that covenant possible to sustain. That is not condemnation. That is an invitation. Because here is what Scripture reveals about the God we serve. He is not a God who withholds good things from his people arbitrarily. Psalm chapter 84 verse 11 says, "No good thing does he withhold from those whose walk is blameless." He is not delaying your love story to punish you. He is allowing time for the architecture to be built in you so that you are positioned to recognize and sustain the union he is preparing for your future. Matthew chapter 19 verse 6 declares, "What God has joined together, let no one separate." But that joining requires a structure capable of holding the weight of what God is placing inside it. He does not want to send a gift into a structure that will collapse around it. So he builds first, through the waiting, through the seasons of interior work, through every lesson that felt like delay but was actually divine construction happening inside the walls where no one could see it. The interior architecture of a lasting covenant is not built overnight. It is built in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the disciplines that nobody applauds and nobody live streams. But God sees every brick. And he is building something in you and in the person he is aligning with you that will stand. Not just for a season, not just through the honeymoon years, but for a lifetime, for generations, for something that outlasts both of you and serves purposes neither of you can fully see yet. Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11 anchors this with absolute certainty. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." The blueprint for your life, including your covenant, already exists in the mind of God. And he is the master builder. He does not begin what he does not intend to complete. If this word reached something real inside you today, if it landed on a question you have been quietly carrying, do one thing right now. Type "build in ME" in the comments as a marker of your commitment to the internal work. Use that space to identify which wall you are focusing on this season. It is a statement of alignment saying to God, "I am not just waiting for the right person. I am inviting you to build the right architecture inside me right now in this season." That is the posture that changes everything. Type it, let it be your public agreement with what God is doing privately. And if this content is feeding your spirit with something deeper than surface-level inspiration, if it's giving you a theological framework for the relationships God has called you to, subscribe to this channel. Because every word released here is built with one intention: to give you language for what God is building in you before the world ever sees the finished structure. Your love story is not just about finding the right person. It is about becoming someone whose interior architecture is worthy of the covenant God has designed. And that work, the quiet, faithful, unseen work of interior building, that is where the most extraordinary love stories begin. Stay under construction. The master builder has not abandoned your blueprint.